Hi, Suman. Hi, Rosa Garcia.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Hello.
Hi, Tiara. And Rachel. Rachel,
Hi, hello.
how are you guys doing?
We're good.
Kumara is here as well. Ah, we have Toy Tray from Vietnam. Hong. Do we call you Hong or Van? Need to vote.
I prefer to be to call Van, so
Van. Hi,
they
Van.
just call me Van. Maybe I renamed it so it's easier for everyone.
Yeah.
Hi, Yong.
Hi. That's Van from Toy Tray, Vietnam. Rosa Garcia is from Timor Post. Where are you from, Rachel?
Oh, I'm from New Narrative.
That's right, New Narrative. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I see Deborah's here as well. Tiara's from Troy. Is from Tamai, Cambodia. Hi, Kumara.
May I suggest that everyone rename themselves to be their names and the country they're from, with the company they work for, so that would be easy.
Yeah, what a great idea. Thanks, Van. So perhaps you put your company name in your name, in your profile name, so that people can see where you're from. Hi, Alia. Alia's from Malaysia, Kini.
Hi.
Can you letak your Malaysia Kini's name in your profile?
What did I? Okay, I check.
Yeah.
All right, hold on.
Wow, ideas here as well. Ideas. Hi, Billy. Hi. Great. Good. We got more coming in actually. Are you guys looking at my main screen agenda? Am I okay? Okay, great. Good. Good. I think people will continue to trickle in. So maybe I'll just start. So my blah blah can be the filler in between, in front before the main event. I think Van's idea is great to put the name of your company in front of your in front or behind your name, so that your colleagues from across the region can kind of know who you are. That's actually one of the big aims of what we're trying to do, so that you guys kind of know each other. So maybe I just start doing my thing. Okay. So welcome everybody to the first masterclass in the SEAFORE Asia Masterclass series. Yeah. So of course today is about managing and protecting labor migration in ASEAN. Okay. So this is going to take a little while. Let me move my slide. Okay. So for those of you who don't know yet, let me have a quick intro to Kiniacademy. Kiniacademy is part of Malaysia Kini. Yeah, it's a training arm. We work a lot. We spend a lot of time on journalism training. We have been involved with investigative reporting past 2 years, and we are also hopefully want to be help out with collaboration across ASEAN. So this SEAFORE is one of the initiatives. All right. Oh, I'm sorry. So I'm Danny Yong. I'm the CEO of Kiniacademy. All right. Okay. So first, let me acknowledge the sponsors. They could be coming in as well, actually. So the sponsor is IWPR, Institute of War and Peace Reporting. They are all over the place, and they have an office in Manila, whom we liaise with, and the office in Washington, DC. So they are the kind sponsors of this project. Right. So the main one of the main aims of this SEAFORE is for journalists like yourselves to connect and collaborate with each other. So apparently ASEAN journalists do not spend enough time collaborating, and this is one of the aims of the program. Okay, so we put all you reporters who are from the same reporting desks. So hopefully in the future, when you think of coming up with stories and you want to reach across to another country and another colleague from another country, so that, I don't know, somehow it enriches gives you a different angle to your story. This is one of those efforts. So same reporting desk, and we are also want to connect via common interests, and in this case, it's topics around ASEAN and the kind of challenges that we face. Okay, so this is the one effort, and we have a few masterclass to continue to let you guys have a chance to connect. All right. So with this particular C4 has got 3 main components. One is the masterclass series. Then there's the reporting part, where each of you have the opportunity to write stories on each one of these topics that we present during the masterclass. And of course, we have a reporting project that we've discussed with your companies on already. And there's another element called the forum on that particular, the c4.org website. And that is an ongoing effort to create a platform for everybody to collaborate, to network, to chat. And actually for reporters like yourselves, if you want to write a story and you want to get comments from people across ASEAN, that would be an opportunity, and a platform to do that. Okay, so on the master classes, we have 5 lined up, today being the first one. And please note the dates there if you want to take a screenshot. All the master classes will happen on Saturdays, 2:30 to 6. The first one, of course, today is based on labor migration. Second one next Saturday on deforestation, transboundary haze, sustainable oil palm foundation production. Of course, for some of you, the deforestation part is more interesting than the haze part. For people from Malaysia or Singapore or Indonesia, that's our yearly event. It's like a haze season every year. Third one is on post-pandemic tourist recovery, which is really interesting because we just come out from the Phuket sandbox, and even Malaysia is looking at implementing a Langkawi, our own Langkawi sandbox, and that's happening 25th September. Then on the 9th of October, the 4th one is on maritime security. So I know some of you know a lot about it, but some of you don't know that much. This is a perfect opportunity to learn more about it. 23rd October will be the 5th masterclass. That's on turning the tide on corruption. Okay, so the way we put it all together, we have great minds from ASEAN to speak on these subjects. And you notice the anchor person, for instance, today's session will be Mahi Ramakrishnan. So she herself was a journalist and someone who is deeply involved with the subject matter. So the idea is to ensure and to have our speakers chime in and give their perspective on the most current state of affairs where that topic is concerned. And the 3 different speakers will bring in their perspectives from their various organizations. And for journalists, I hope you guys can see that this is a great opportunity for you to write a story, even from the content you glean from the masterclass. Okay, so you see all the faces are the nationalities. They're all Jackie or Pichit is from Thailand, the handsome boy on the left, bottom left corner. On the right top, you see Maria Angela, she's Filipino, and Encik Didik is from Indonesia. So this will be the common thread in all our master classes. They'll all be ASEAN speakers, ASEAN subject matter experts. Please bear in mind, all these people are someone you now will get to know of. They can become your source, for your story today and going to the future. So SEAFORE, when we call it Southeast Asia Forum for Reporting, is really very geared towards helping reporters help us. You know, when you write your stories, you help to further the agenda of each one of these challenges for ASEAN. All right. So some simple housekeeping thing. We hope everybody can keep the mics on mute. I know working from home, we are all from at home now, so the kids might be jumping into the rooms and making a lot of cute noises. I hope you can keep your video on. One thing I really want to encourage is for you guys to ask questions. Okay, so let's get these speakers to work pretty hard for their money. Actually some of the speakers do not even take money from us. So the idea is get yourself a really good understanding of the topics that's being discussed today. You have a unique opportunity to get perspectives from four different perspectives, and all experts as well. And we have a section at the end where we give a whole hour for a Q&A. So Mahi will take us through that, and they will go through all the questions that you put in the chat box, and we'll go through that. Of course, I think you guys already know the session is being recorded. Yeah, after this, we will post the recording in the SEAFORE.org website, as well as our Facebook page, right? We will also have transcripts of the recordings done, and we will upload that on our website as well. So those of you who like to have the transcript, you can get that, and you can totally do a Google Translate to translate that to your own language and use some parts of it as in your articles, right? So we did a poll, and we have some nine respondents, and so let me just go through the poll while the rest make their way into the Zoom room. So for these questions, have you seen changes in public attitudes towards migrant workers? Well, 2/3 say yes. Second question, which of the following is the greatest concern of migrant workers in your country? So it seems like everybody has got is really concerned with health and access to healthcare. I suppose, of course, this has got direct relation to COVID-19. I see there's also great concern for migrant workers in the area of social protection, access to relief/income support. 7 out of 9 said they're concerned about that, and 6 out of 9 also talk about says that they are concerned with their access to justice and their rights. Yeah. So in terms of this question, to what extent are migrant workers policed in authorities? 6 out of 9 thinks that they are highly, they are moderately policed in the country. Do you think the vulnerability of migrant labor has been affected by the depiction in the media? So that's quite 8 out of 9. That's quite unanimous, or almost unanimous. The other one is not so sure. So I think this is really a byproduct of all the reporting and on testings and incidences of COVID infections. What changes would you like to see in the perception of and reporting by the media about migrant workers? So 78% talk about wants to have more direct engagement with migrant communities. So it's great to see that many people are concerned with them, because these guys really do need many champions to help them out. So I don't know if I'm too fast or too slow agenda, but that we will be moving to the keynote presentation now.
Perfect timing.
Okay, great. So let me remind ourselves the title for the presentation: Displaced, Stranded, and Unprotected. So we want to examine the impact of COVID-19 on ASEAN's migrant workers. Yeah, so let me introduce Mahi Ramakrishnan. So Mahi is an award-winning filmmaker and investigative journalist. She's worked with in both TV and print media for the past 21 years, and this has been with BBC, Time Magazine, New York Times, Al Jazeera, US Today, Voice of America. So she's she's tackled subjects such as Islamic militancy, trafficking, migrant workers, refugees, statelessness, child brides, underage sex industry, LGBT community. So for you reporters out there, somebody probably can reach out to when you talk about these sort of subjects. She currently runs Beyond Borders, an NGO that promotes and protects the rights of refugees, asylum seekers, stateless people, and migrant workers in Malaysia. Yeah, she does extensive research on hate speech and atrocity crimes against vulnerable communities. And she's also currently working with Queensland University to create a hate speech application. So I really thank Mahi that she volunteered her time with us, spend time with us, so to speak with our audience with that sort of schedule. So I'll hand it over to you, Mahi. Yeah, I'll stop sharing now. Yeah.
Okay. Google presentation. 1 minute here. Should I do this? Yes. Okay. Camilla, shall we just... Just give me a minute, sorry.
Meanwhile, I'm putting up Mahi's profile in the chat so that you guys can marvel at what she's done. But more importantly, bear that in mind so that in future, if you need a source on this or source or comment on these matters, on these different topics, you can reach out to her. Sorry, I just volunteered your time, Mahi.
No worries. Sorry about that. I kind of, got a bit stuck with yeah. So thank you very much. This is indeed a great opportunity. So thank you very much to Kiniacademy for actually having me. And thanks to everyone who is here today to be a part of this masterclass. And I really wish that this is happening, differently with me actually meeting all of you, because I like that discussion. I like you to interrupt me and to ask me questions. Unfortunately, we don't have that kind of a privilege at this point in time. So I guess we just have to make do with whatever we have. And I'm going to share with you whatever I have known, whatever I know from my work on the ground with migrant workers, not just in Malaysia, but also Southeast Asia, and also the kind of research that I've done and the presentations that I've been a part of, and also having learned from many other experts globally and from the region as well. So I hope that, this is not about me being the expert, as Danny continuously says, because I believe that all of you know what I'm going to say, but, I just hope that we can both work together, and I really look forward to the collaboration and also the reporting in which we can both be a part of. I'm really looking forward to that. So I'll just yeah, so I'm just going to go straight to what's happening in the region. I know all of you know what's actually happening. It's just that, at the beginning of, at the end of January last year, World Health Organization declared that we actually have an outbreak, we actually have a pandemic. And until then, people were not really very sure as to what the COVID-19 was all about, or the kind of ruckus and mess that it is actually going to create, the havoc that it's going to cause throughout the region, and the kind of loss of jobs and loss of income and even suicides that it is going to trigger. So, you know, we were kind of like anticipating that this is something that will actually come on and then pass off. But then I think that, you know, as what even the Malaysia's newly minted health minister has said, it is something that we have to contend with. COVID-19 seems to be something that we have to live with. And I think in this aspect, Singapore has done really well in terms of acknowledging the fact that COVID is actually here to stay and looking at mitigating our lives around that. So, you know, COVID-19, the first region that it has actually hit severely is the Southeast Asian region, and us in ASEAN are the ones who have been hit first. And if you ask me why, that's because of the close geographical proximity to China, the business that we have with China, the travel and tourism that we have with China. So the thing is that, you know, now, yes, of course, Malaysia was one of the countries that came out looking really great because, you know, it seemed that in 3 months, you know, we had managed to mitigate the pandemic. The cases were down to almost 1, and everyone just was really thrilled. And Thailand had also done a great job, but, you know, it is just that we realized that because Thailand has at one point also stopped the kind of proactive testing, and Malaysia did not really bother about doing rapid testing involving migrant workers. It's like, you know, everyone was trying to somehow or other get rid of this pandemic really quickly, and every government took the easy way out. We are now seeing waves and waves of COVID-19 infections, cases, you know, raging across countries, and the number of deaths alarming. In Malaysia, you know, we went into a total lockdown when there were like 200 or 300 odd cases, and everyone was like, wow, 300 odd cases? Oh my God, what's happening? But now we have got 20,000 cases and we don't really know how to deal with it. And neither does the government, but we'll talk about that a little bit more. The thing is that, you know, what we are seeing now is that, you know, we are hit with job losses, income losses, people attempting and committing suicides. And we have come to a point where there is an economic downturn, primarily caused by the continued lockdown, global disruption to trade. And unfortunately for us, the people of ASEAN, we may be looking at a recession. Now, if you look at how have ASEAN countries actually responded, well, they have responded. And I know we want to talk a little bit about the Declaration on Strengthening Social Protection. And I will talk about the social protection throughout this 35 minutes, because that is where we have actually failed, and failed quite miserably. And I think that needs to be talked about a little bit more so that we know, you know, what kind of pressure and lobbying efforts that need to be put on individual governments to ensure that those who are really vulnerable can be protected. Now, the first slide, we were talking about what was actually happening in ASEAN. But, you know, if you really take a step back and ask yourself, yes, we, the people of ASEAN, small and medium industries, people, students, activists, you know, businesses, all of us have been affected. But who or which group has been affected the most? And that's without a doubt the migrant workers. And that is because, you know, when we look at, because we know that it is the small and medium industries, services, as well as tourism sectors that have been mostly affected in Southeast Asia. And if we look at who is working these sectors, these are definitely migrant workers. How has ASEAN actually, or ASEAN countries responded? They have responded with stimulus packages. But, you know, if we really take a step back and look at where these stimulus packages went, how much of it went directly to support the communities, people that were really affected? How many of these stimulus packages were targeted towards social protection, towards people like the migrant workers, both in the informal sector and the formal sector, both documented and undocumented? And if I may expand this a little further, even though we are talking about migrant workers specifically, how much of this stimulus package were actually targeted towards people like refugees, for example, asylum seekers, stateless people, people with precarious immigration status? The answer is, to a large extent, we can safely say that not much of it, or very little of it, was actually targeted towards creating a social protection or creating security and safety mechanisms for those who are vulnerable, and primarily the migrant workers. Now, we can look at, if we look at Thailand, Thailand did give about, if I'm not mistaken, $150 targeted toward migrant workers from April to June last year. If we look at Malaysia, it has failed miserably. I work on the ground. As Danny introduced, I do run a non-profit organization called Beyond Borders Malaysia, and we have been doing aid distributions from last year right up to today. We have reached out to about 80,000 families. We have done, like, even in the last 1 to 2 months, we have done like tens of thousands of meals to poor and vulnerable communities. And that is primarily because the Malaysian government, just like any other ASEAN government, has also failed miserably to include. Now, the word is being inclusive, which I think is just not in the vocabulary of many governments. So it has failed to actually include migrant workers in its fiscal response packages, which means migrant workers are left to fend for themselves. Now, we see that SMEs and sectors, services sectors, and also tourism sectors, manufacturing, construction, these are the ones that have really taken a bad hit, and they're largely worked by migrant workers. So what happens when there is nothing to actually help them? Well, the answer is what I'm seeing on the ground on a day-to-day basis. There are relentless calls and text messages to us for food, for essential items, for groceries, for vegetables. And we see governments, whether it's the Malaysian government, the Thai government, or even the Indonesian president going on his bicycle looking really sporty, talking about wearing face masks, being safe in public, talking about social distancing. But let me ask you a question. We all know that migrant workers live in very precarious situations. They live in congested environments. They live sandwiched like sardines in small apartments. How is social distancing possible? Whether it's Singapore, whether it's Thailand, whether it's Indonesia, whether it's Cambodia, the plight of the migrant workers remains the same because of, or at least let's look at the accommodation. The accommodation is really left wanting. So how do we get them to do social protection when social distancing is actually a privilege? It's a privilege for a lot of, it's a privilege that many of us actually take for granted, because we have the space and we have also the capacity to buy ourselves sanitizers. Some of us have sanitizers for the home, and we buy masks in bulk because we are just terrified of running out. But when you have lost your job, when there is no income, when there is no possibility of livelihood, when you don't even know when cases are going to reduce, or if cases are going to reduce, and when that's going to happen, how are you going to spend that little bit of money that you have to buy yourself these protection, whether it's masks or sanitizers? So that is the situation of the migrant workers, not just in Malaysia, but in different parts of the region as well. Now, what happens when they live in precarious situations without social support from states, from governments? That actually contributes to the rising infections that we continue to see on a day-to-day basis. It gives rise to the number of deaths, which are also increasing. And these are people that actually do not have savings to stock up or anything. So what do you think the government could have done or should have done? Well, it should have provided and reinforced income support, and also put in place initiatives to allow informal workers to register for emergency social support, for example. Now, are we seeing this in any part of ASEAN? Are we seeing this in Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, Indonesia? No, because these people seem to have been left out on the brink. These people have been left out to fend for themselves. Okay, I'm going to try and change slides here. Ajinda, I'm having a bit of a problem changing the slide.
Press enter.
enter or?
Okay, or you scroll your mouse to the next. Are you using a mouse?
No. Okay.
Okay, the arrow, then use the arrow key.
I think no, this is the first slide.
Yes, so you're going backwards. So use the arrow key on the opposite direction. The forward arrow key. The one that's pointing towards your right. On your keyboard.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. It was working just now.
Okay, just click. There's a message that appears on your screen.
Yeah,
I'll control it.
Okay. This is third slide, I think, after this. Yeah.
I'll do it for you.
Okay. Now, I've been talking a lot about migrant workers and how they're actually treated by different governments in ASEAN. But if you take a step back, many public health researchers were astounded with the success of Malaysia and Thailand, and rightfully so. We came out looking great, and so did Thailand. But unfortunately, especially Thailand in minimizing community spread, for example. But now, because of the continued mutation of the virus, and also because of the lack of proper policy put in place, there have been recent outbreaks in Malaysia as well as Thailand. And we can, if we want to look at 3 countries in ASEAN, we need to look at Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore, which were actually badly affected. And also because major outbreaks did involve migrant workers, and in Malaysia and Thailand, it continues to involve migrant workers. Now, policy, if we really look at what kind of policies have these governments, Malaysia, Thailand, and Singapore, adopted in terms of looking at these rising infections amongst migrant workers. Now, I can safely say that the policies were discriminatory against migrant workers, including attempts to segregate them from the rest of the population. So when you look at Thailand, primarily Singapore, and also Malaysia, this has increased racism and xenophobia. And it is also interesting in the case of Thailand. Let me give you a story. There were about 400,000 migrant workers in Thailand's seafood processing sector. And many of them, or mostly, they came from Myanmar. They live in very difficult conditions, congested accommodations, and they speak very little Thai. Now, in December 2020, there were rapid testing done amongst people who were in this sector, and 12,000 specifically. There were 12,000 specific cases during the testing. And then as they tested more, there were many more thousands. Now, I can't ask, if you look at how the Thai Prime Minister actually responded to these alarming number of cases amongst those who actually worked in Thailand's seafood processing sector, it's actually mind-boggling, because this is what he said. He actually accused the Myanmar workers, and he said that by smuggling themselves across the border, that they had actually brought COVID-19 into the country, into Thailand. But what Mr. Prayut forgot to actually say is the fact that, Thailand's government officials were actually the ones who were playing a primary role in allowing for these illegal smuggling of workers from Myanmar across the borders. Now, if we look at Malaysia, Malaysia has also had a similar experience, in the sense that for decades, our NGOs have been talking about bad accommodation and the fact that migrant workers were working long hours and they were living in congested environment. Now, even though there was lots of effort, lots of lobbying efforts, it did not actually change any policy where the government is concerned, because the government kept going after migrant workers, and not even after the labor agents, the employment agents, or even Malaysian employers. So you know, sometimes when I talk to my friends and fellow human rights activists and those who actually work on the ground, they tell me things like, you know, this is karma biting us back. This is like karma giving it back to us because of the way we abused migrant workers. Now we are forced to contend with actually looking at their accommodation, looking at reversing policies, looking at putting in place safety and security mechanisms so that this infection can actually be contained at this point in time. And, you know, also in Malaysia, we had last year, because of the segregation policy, we also had huge suppression of the media, primarily Al Jazeera, because it went on to report about the working conditions, and it also went on to talk about corruption involving immigration officers and the difficult and dangerous conditions in which migrant workers were working. I'm just going to touch briefly about this because I'm sure all of you know about what has actually happened. And we had, like, you know, we had immigration raids, we had the authorities going after Al Jazeera, and we also had the former government, which was led by Muhyiddin Yassin, did not do anything in terms of leadership to contain or to condemn those kinds of victimization of migrant workers. Neither did it do anything to condemn the suppression of the media, suppression of freedom of expression and freedom of the media. Now, if you really look at all of this, the way ASEAN governments have actually responded to the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of, you know, in relation at least to where the migrant workers are concerned, you know, they have done it using segregation policies. They've done it using a lot of, creating a lot of fear factor. They have done it, they have done a lot of victim blaming, blaming the migrant workers, and they have tried to stay away from blame. Now, what has all of this done in terms of where COVID-19 pandemic is concerned? Because what is actually contributed, what is to severely impact in undermining the pandemic management by all these respective governments, and that includes Malaysia, Thailand, and Singapore to a large extent, even though now in Singapore, we are seeing that the cases have been contained, but the racism, the xenophobia, the hate against the migrant workers in Singapore has actually become worse because of following the pandemic. Okay, Ajinda, you can change the... Okay, so before the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, there were at least 10 million international migrant workers in ASEAN, out of which 50% were women. Now, it is really interesting to look at how we have, or the media has, or governments have looked at the response to the pandemic in relation to women migrant workers. Now, if you really look at this, between 10 to 70% of the migrant workers in Malaysia, I mean, in Southeast Asia, work in informal sectors. And when you talk about informal sectors, the first vision that comes to your mind, or the first picture that comes to your mind, is the picture of women workers, because they are the ones who largely work in these informal sectors. And they face specific challenges as they are at the core of the COVID-19 response. It curtails their income, and they are also more vulnerable to layoffs, and they are less eligible for support mechanisms. And also there is an increase in domestic violence amongst migrant workers who are here with their families as well. So in terms, if we really take a step back and look at Singapore, for example, Singapore's Association of Action and Research, which is actually a women's helpline, recorded an increase of 33% of domestic violence cases over the previous year. And if you look at Indonesian Women's Association for Justice and Legal Aid Institution, it saw a threefold increase in referral cases over a 2-week period from the time women were asked to stay at home and work. Now, most of these women may not include migrant workers, but I just want to give you a sense of how women, whether they are migrant workers or otherwise, are the ones who are even more affected because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, I would like to also talk to you a little bit about a particular case that I worked on in Malaysia involving a migrant worker. Her name is Risa. She's Indonesian, and she actually was supposed to come and help us clean the house. But, I was waiting and she didn't turn up. And I thought, okay, let me call her mother. I called Risa. I couldn't get hold of her. I called her mother, and the mother said, you know what? She has already left. And I asked her, how long ago? And she said, about 30 minutes, 45 minutes ago, she was walking to your house, and it takes about, what, 5 to 8 minutes to get to your place. And I was thinking, okay, but I can't find her. So I was actually really worried because, I thought that maybe she has had an accident or something had happened to her along the way. But, a few hours later, about 6 or 7 hours later, she calls us and tells us, she was hysterical. And she told us that when she was walking to come to our home, there was a person who was sitting in a car who opened the car door and asked her, who are you? Where are you going? And she said, okay, my name is Risa and I'm a migrant worker and I'm going to, clean this person's house. And the person is like, let me look at your visa. Let me look at your passport. And she was like, okay, so I don't have documents. And he was like, in that case, I need you to get into the car. So this girl, who is a very young girl, was terrified and, not knowing what else to do, she got into the car. And she said that this man actually drove her round and round and round for a few hours before taking her into his apartment. And when she got there, he asked her for sex. She said no. He slapped her, hit her, punched her. And she did not tell me whether she was forced to have sex with him or not. And I really didn't want to push or ask her, because I thought if she had wanted to tell me, she would have done so. So now this is not just one case, but there are many such incidences which are happening. And if you really look at even the law that is put in place where migrant workers are concerned, for example, say Risa has been raped and I go to the police station and lodge a police report. Do you know what's going to happen to Risa? I'm not going to get police officers coming and, talking to her, or women police officers coming and talking to her, trying to find out who is the person who raped her, or if she was gang raped, if that was the case. Nothing of this sort is going to happen, because when it involves an undocumented migrant worker in Malaysia, the first law that kicks in is the Immigration Act. It takes precedence over everything else. So what comes into question is the fact that she doesn't have visa on her passport. That she has a precarious immigration status, which means that before I can say cheese, she will be picked up and she will be in prison. She would have been detained. The fact that she will never ever get to go to court or seek justice or make sure that the perpetrators serve jail time or any of those things. So this is actually the kind of persecution, for lack of another word, that migrant workers, and primarily women migrant workers, are facing in not just Malaysia, but also different parts of the world. Now, in the next slide, you will see that Malaysia's former Prime Minister, Mr. Muhyiddin Yassin, actually called for a coherent, multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder approach to ensure effective response to the pandemic. And of course, the 26th ASEAN Economic Ministers meeting in March last year talked about, came up with a statement which looked at a collective effort, a collective action, in particular focus on leveraging technology, for example, and digital trade to foster supply chain amongst the different countries in ASEAN. And also it talked about rollout of a post-recovery plan. But let's look at how inclusive these action plans are, how inclusive of migrant workers these action plans are. So let's look at Thailand and Malaysia, because these are the two countries which are actually battling widespread infection, daily cases, as well as deaths. Now, going back to the social protection, there has been no social protection measures that actually looks specifically at including migrant workers in both Malaysia and Thailand. In June 2021, just a few months ago, the Thai Prime Minister, Mr. Prayut, closed campsites for construction workers for until like early July. And that pushed them to live in very congested spaces with limited access to medicine and food. Now, this seems to be the kind of immediate, I won't use the word response, I will use the word reaction that ASEAN governments have to trying to mitigate the spread of infections. And then what happened is, following what the Prime Minister did, his Labour Minister stopped all proactive COVID-19 testing. And when you look at Malaysia for a long, long time, despite lots and lots of lobbying efforts by parliamentarians, as well as non-governmental organizations and human rights activists, lobbying the government to actually do rapid testing so that we can know the exact number of cases. Malaysia also did not do that until very recently. And there's also been a lot of flip-flop on policies, in terms of standard operating procedures during total lockdown, during the recovery phase. And also, just like Thailand, there has been every effort to kind of play down the number of cases and infections on the daily rate. Now, if you really look at ASEAN governments, while they do talk about being inclusive, taking account of all stakeholders, unfortunately, migrant workers who have always been at the core, at the heart of development in each of these countries, have always been left out. So let's specifically look at Malaysia's story. Last year, I'm sure all of you know this, the Malaysia's defense minister actually said that, he said this to migrant workers as well as refugees. He said, please come out and get tested. And we promise you that, we are not going to target you. We promise you that we will not go after you. There will be no witch hunt, that there will be no immigration raids. But a few months into that promise, immigration raids started happening. And that was when Al Jazeera started reporting about these raids, and also the kind of corruption and the kind of inhumane treatment at the hands of immigration officers that actually got them into trouble. Now, if you really look at what's happening currently in different countries in Southeast Asia, and you take a step back and look at the kind of policing that's actually happening, the kind of raids which are actually happening, the kind of persecution, the kind of witch hunt that is happening against migrant workers, it is not, the government and authorities have not backed out one bit. They have not backed down one bit. So you can ask yourself, how much inclusive, or how inclusive do they look at migrant workers in terms of the socio-economic development and also the health crisis that we are seeing at this point in time. In the case of Malaysia, I would think that it had lost a great opportunity to come up with a more comprehensive healthcare and also welfare policy. You look at Singapore, it has also failed miserably in capitalizing on this COVID-19 pandemic to come up with a more inclusive, or I will not even say more, to come up with an inclusive healthcare and welfare policy. If you look at Cambodia, if you look at Indonesia, it is all the same. Now, if you look at, oh, you have already changed the slide. Okay, thank you. Now, if you look at the lack of, social protection, there was, in 2013, ASEAN came out with the Declaration on Strengthening Social Protection, and governments have actually pledged to do so. While this remains good in paper, it has not been implemented on the ground. Because if it had been implemented on the ground, the countries that I just mentioned would have capitalized on the COVID-19 pandemic and would have taken a step back and looked at experts to come up with a more comprehensive welfare and healthcare policy. None of this has happened across Southeast Asia. Now, if you look at protection mechanisms, or if you look at fiscal measurements which have been thrown at migrant workers, these are ad hoc. There is no policy that actually governs it. There is no framework that actually governs it. In the case of Malaysia, there has been absolutely none. But at least in Thailand, you have seen some effort. But like I said, it was ad hoc. It was over a period of 2 to 4 months, 2 to 4 weeks. And it has not really materialized in actually mitigating the COVID-19 pandemic, the consequences, or even creating a safe and secure environment for the migrant workers across the region. Now, even if you look at, for example, you look at what's happening in Myanmar, for example, with the kind of persecution, the targeted persecution by the military, which has increased, which has seen an exponential increase of COVID-19 cases in Burma. And it is, people, my friends who actually work out of Burma say that, it's just so bad. The situation is just so bad that they won't even be surprised if the entire population, minus the elite, are actually, will at some point actually have COVID-19 infections. But the thing is that, if you really look at what stops ASEAN governments from ensuring that there is a proper social protection mechanism, that there is a proper safety mechanism, that there are proper protocols within the social security mechanisms, then you can actually look at the fact that it's not just the non-interference policy, which is so archaic, because if you look at ASEAN, we have got the ASEAN Economic Community, which is economic cooperation. So while you can have economic cooperation, when it comes to actually looking at the human rights violations by individual governments within ASEAN, then conveniently they use ASEAN's non-interference policy. But if you look beyond ASEAN's non-interference policy, then you will see that ASEAN has always been challenged by corruption, uneven social development and technological adaptation, environmental degradation, and also the rise of authoritarian governments. We leave it here because I have an idea for all of you to ponder on just before we close this session. Now, you can't talk about migration and forced migration or otherwise without actually talking about the Global Compact for Migration. Now, this is not really ASEAN, it's more global, but I thought I'll just touch upon it a little bit as a way of giving you something to compare against, actually. So this was adopted in 2016 at the UN General Assembly. In a way, it was good because it was the first intergovernmental negotiated agreement. And because it talked about refugees and migrants, then you can say that to an extent it sent a very powerful message that matters relating to migration and refugees have actually taken an international stand, does have an international agenda. But the thing is that this Global Compact for Migration actually also says that it respects the sovereignty of each country, which means that the countries can decide who can get to stay in their country or who doesn't get to stay in their country. And more importantly, the Global Compact for Migration is non-binding. Now, if you take a step back and look at the ASEAN Declaration on the Protection and Promotion of the Rights of Migrant Workers, very much in our backyard, then you will see that this is also a non-binding agreement. And it has got very limited scope in effectively protecting migrant workers from exploitation and also from trafficking, right? So, and if you also look at this, the ASEAN's declaration goes a step forward in marginalizing migrant workers, I must say, by saying that this declaration is only effective towards documented migrants and those traveling in ASEAN. Now, this is really important because if you look at the undocumented migrants, most of them work in informal sectors. And the moment they are in informal sectors, then you can safely say that a large amount of these workers are women. So the ASEAN Declaration for the protection and promotion of the rights of migrant workers in ASEAN has actually completely negated looking into the protection of women migrant workers from trafficking and also from exploitation. Okay, so I was actually thinking of talking about the securitization of migrant workers and politics of insecurity, because, you know, the whole rhetoric that we hear time and again, whether it's in Indonesia or Thailand or any other country, it's really about, you know, governments saying that, you know, that they are worried that the rise in migration is seen as destabilizing the nation's security. So this is actually a very populist and nationalistic approach, but it does work because, you know, even in Malaysia, for example, there is a lot of xenophobia and racism and a lot of fear when it comes to migrant workers, and largely because this is fueled on by the government itself. And in Malaysia, if you look at it, we have this thing called Relawan Rakyat, or Rela, which is a nationalist organization. They carry baton and shields, and there are 500,000 volunteers in this organization, and they are largely used to patrol and to nab migrant workers and to check if they've got documents. They are the ones who accompany the immigration when they go on midnight raids. And they are actually a force that everyone is, the migrant workers primarily are terrified of. But if you look at that, they have got 500,000 volunteers. But if you combine Malaysia's military and police, we have got a total of 101,500 members only. So this voluntary task force, if I may say, that goes around targeting migrant workers and primarily looking for undocumented migrant workers is 5 times more in strength and number compared to the total comparing it to Malaysia's total military and police force. Now, in the east coast of Sabah in 2002, 2003, the same rhetoric of securitization and the migrant workers being a threat to national security was used, and the Sabah government has then been parroting itself and thumping its chest, saying that it has completely weeded out undocumented migrant workers. But, you know, what has actually happened on the ground is that there has been an exponential growth, because when migrant workers come into Malaysia, for example, they come 90 to 95% of them come with legal channels. They come with documents. It's only in Malaysia that they become undocumented, primarily due to labor agents, employment agents, and errant Malaysian employers who just dump them, who take away their passports and do not bother to actually renew the visa. Now, the same thing also happens in Thailand, where you have, you know, migrant workers who actually come from Burma and work in Thailand, who are then at the mercy of Thai employers, and their passports are taken away and kept. And when it comes, when it's time for renewal of their visa, then it's up to the discretion of the Thai employers as to whether or not they want to employ or continue to employ these people, whether or not they want to extend their visa. And again, because they speak very little Thai, they have got no legal recourse. Primarily also, if they are undocumented, then there is no legal recourse for any country, you know, from any country in the region. But what I would also like to look at, you know, besides the securitization of migrant workers and also politics of insecurity, is to actually look at the securitization of COVID-19 itself. Now, you know, for example, the emergency laws have been put in place to silence human rights workers and human rights defenders. The state of emergency law in Cambodia, for example, actually allowed authorities to monitor and gave them the powers to restrict what is being posted on social media. You know, in Philippines, human rights defenders were charged when they were actually out donating and delivering goods and groceries because they had what was quoted as anti-government pamphlets and flyers in their car. In Indonesia, police regulators use, regularly indulge in arbitrary arrests. And in Timor-Leste, freedom of expression and freedom of the press have been curtailed in light of its national state of emergency. Now in Malaysia, yes, finally the emergency has come to an end, but it was no better because the government used the emergency to actually do procurements during COVID-19, and because Parliament was not in session, because Parliament was suspended, there were no debates and nobody actually knows as to how these money were actually used. Now, earlier I did speak about, this is access to vaccination actually. Earlier I did speak about migrant workers and how the government went back on its words and how it actually targeted media, not just Al Jazeera, but also local media, to ensure that they were not propagating fake news. Now, the word fake news was so vague that anything that the government construed to be fake news could get media as well as human rights activists into trouble. But what is it that we are seeing now because of the policies that Malaysia's government has actually implemented? Now, the government goes around saying that by the end of October, which is by the end of next month, we would have achieved 80% herd immunity, which means that it's good for the country. But we have been asking the government this question: when you talk about 80%, are you talking about everyone who make up a part of the Malaysian society? Are you talking about migrant workers, both documented and undocumented? Are you talking about refugees, stateless people, asylum seekers? Are you talking about people who do not have birth certificates, but who could be Malaysians, but do not have access to actually get themselves vaccinated? But if you really take a step back and look at Malaysia and vaccination access to migrant workers, it is so flip-flop that even somebody like me who actually works towards getting migrant workers to turn up at vaccination centers to get themselves vaccinated do not really know what's happening on the ground. Because firstly, you need to have this thing called My Sejahtera downloaded, and you need to fill in your particulars in order for you to be called in for registration. And even if you want to go and stand in line and do a walk-in, you need this My Sejahtera vaccination, this My Sejahtera application to have been downloaded and filled up. Now, for someone like me who works on the ground, it's such a frightening prospect because I'm continuously worried that after the vaccination drive is over, that the government can actually use the data to actually go after the migrant workers because their addresses are there already. And so this impending fear has actually kept a lot of migrant workers from actually going and getting themselves vaccinated. So Malaysia's 80% herd immunity remains very much to be seen. So I'm just going to take another 3 minutes to wrap up. I've got a note from Adib saying that, a warning saying that, hey, wrap it up. So the thing is, the good thing that has happened in Southeast Asia, in ASEAN, in the region is that we are seeing lots and lots and lots of people, citizens, ordinary people like you and me, coming together to do everything they possibly can to those who are on the fringes of the society, migrant workers, both documented, undocumented, refugees, and others. And in Timor-Leste, we have the Women's Network and the Environment Network, which is coordinating emergency support. In Philippines, we also have a lot of lobbying effort asking for transparency in government procurement process. In Malaysia, we have the Kita Jaga Kita movement, which is a group of ordinary citizens who have come together to help those who are less fortunate than us, people like the migrant workers and others as well. Now, before I wrap up, I did say that at some point, I would like to talk about ASEAN and the fact that it has always been seen as a toothless tiger and nothing more, that ASEAN has failed miserably, whether in terms of actually coming up with social security for those who are vulnerable, for the migrant workers, looking at ensuring the safety of women migrant workers, or even as a body coming together to reprimand each other of human rights violations. But here, I see a lot of you who are representing different parts of the region, and you have come together to try and work and report. Now, I would like to ask you a question. Do you think that you folks can actually form a formidable alliance so that, beyond this 3.5 hours that you are with us, you will continue to communicate with each other, that you will continue to push and lobby for better media, for a better environment in which media in your respective countries can work in. And in the process of doing so, if one of you gets persecuted, would the others come together to actually lobby to ensure that your rights are protected, that they will actually go on social media platforms, that they will go to their respective human rights organizations and lobby for you? So the question here is, can you be the alternative to ASEAN that never was anything but just a group of big boys, you know, patting each other on the backs and having, you know, maybe incredible meals during their meetings? So I really hope that, you know, you will be able to do something, that you'll be able to come together, and that you will be able to form a formidable force that can be, that has to be reckoned with, and also act as some kind of a watchdog beyond today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mahi. Our next speaker is Maria. Perhaps, Mahi, you would like to introduce Maria to everyone?
Yeah, 1 minute. So Maria is from the Butuan city, a resource-rich region in Mindanao, but poverty pushed many women in Butuan to work and live overseas as migrant workers. Mayan lived in Hong Kong for 10 years, where her activism led her to co-found Migrant Forum in Asia, MFA, a regional alliance and platform of cooperation among migrant workers and advocates in countries of origin and destination. Today, MFA is a well-recognized voice of migrants in the Asian region. Mayan also developed the practice of migrant savings for alternative investments, or Save and Invest, as a strategy for productive return and reintegration to countries of origin, create their own jobs, and make overseas employment a choice. Maria organized savings associations in destination countries and founded Unlad Kabayan. For this strategy, Mayan was awarded Social Entrepreneur of the Year 2007 by Ernst & Young and Schwab Foundation. She has a master's degree in management in UP and attended a short course on non-profit management at Harvard Business School. So over to you, Maria. Thank you.
Hi, Maria,
Thank you.
would you like to share your screen, or would you like me to control it from here?
Let me check how.
Mahi, you'll have to stop your share then.
I have already.
Okay, give me a minute to work on this.
Is it okay now?
All right. Should I share it for you, Maria, as you speak? I can scroll it for you then.
Okay.
Okay, Maria, I'm sharing it for you.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I think Van has got a question for Mahi. Maybe we can just take it now.
Okay.
Now that we are
Here we
transitioning.
are. I think this is it.
Should I?
Can I take questions, or we wait until, you know, the end of all the section?
Yeah. Maybe since we got the time now, Van.
Sure, I can go ahead. I think this is, you know, like, thank you, Mahi, for a very great presentation. I think it's inspired, but at the same time, it's also triggered a lot of questions because, for example, when you mentioned that ASEAN countries lack of an inclusive social protection system is yeah, it's fair, and you know, I think each of us here can, you know, also recognize that. But in, you know, in the pandemic, we also, you know, and a lot of, you know, ASEAN countries like say Vietnam also say that, oh, you know, like the whole social protection system is not is not really comprehensive yet, and even for their own citizens, they didn't even protect them well. So so it's really understandable that migrant worker is at the bottom of the ladder. But when social protection system is not there, who get first? Who get it first is really a question. And say in the case of Vietnam, if protecting immigrant worker first, is other citizens also ask for their benefit, and this is one point that I want to raise. I agree with you that in terms of when they suffer from abusive, in any cases, sexual harassment, and the first thing that kick in if they seek law protection is they was illegally enter the country, and that might result in law enforcement kick them out. And when you mention and it's also hard to protect them, because they violate the law first. And I think the last thing is when you mentioned that Malaysia PM saying that we need sort of a concluded comprehensive approach about immigrant worker. I think they mean that it's legal immigrant worker, because we all know that at the first place nobody should illegally enter one country. So that's my 3 discussion point, I guess. And again, thank you for a very great and inspiring presentation.
Thank you. Since you've asked the question, I'll take 2 minutes to just answer them. I think one of the other questions is whether I was talking about just domestic workers. No, I wasn't talking about domestic workers. I was talking about all the migrant workers. And when you say yes, there has been lots of conversations, not just in Vietnam, but also Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore primarily, about who gets the treatment. When you look at social protection, who should be protected first, our citizens or them? Now, this othering is where the problem is, because what we need to look at is a comprehensive welfare and healthcare policy that is inclusive. The othering is the fact that is the one that has actually put us in this kind of trouble, primarily for countries where the rising and raising infections are coming from migrant workers. So this othering has to stop. That is a real progressive step forward in my opinion. And when I talked about the Prime Minister, Malaysia's former Prime Minister, I wasn't talking about him in terms of migration. He was talking about inclusivity. He was talking about bringing together different people and businesses and stakeholders. But in that process, just like ASEAN has always talked about the ASEAN economic community, but very cleverly and conveniently left out those who are in the lower rung of the social stratification, Malaysia's Prime Minister also left out migrant workers, both documented, undocumented, asylum seekers, and others. So it's about, those who are our people. But even when you look at our people, even if you look at our people who are Malaysians, you need to look at who the other our people are. That is why it's really important to look at what World Health Organization has said. For you to be fine, I need to be fine. For them to be fine, she has to be fine, for all of us to be fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mahi.
Yeah.
So now I think we'll move over to Maria's presentation. And I'd just like to tell everyone that if you have any questions or comments for the speakers, please feel free to leave it in the chat. And what we'll be doing is we'll be compiling the questions and we'll be dealing with them during the question and answer session. And that way we can have a more fruitful discussion. So now we'd like to hand it over to Maria. Maria, are you there? And we'll allow Maria to carry out her presentation.
Yeah, Maria, go ahead. I will share your slides for you for the moment.
Okay.
At the moment.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ajindra. And good afternoon to everyone. It's a good occasion to share with you the situation of migrant workers, particularly from the perspective of migrant workers themselves. and from the countries of origin, the experiences of migrant workers as they start to come home from the destination countries because of the pandemic. Since the 1990s, labor migration and migrant workers' efforts to control their lives has come a long way. When they were just mere commodities during that period, this time around, they are now becoming visible, one, and becoming more vocal about the situation and the abuses that they experience. Now, as we talk about migrant workers in the ASEAN, I would like to underscore the character of the ASEAN and Timor-Leste, as we know that when people write about ASEAN and Timor-Leste, it's an understanding of labor migration that is conscious of shared history and heritage, and also an appreciation of the multi-diversity of the region. And because of migration, this is what has brought the kind of, what do they say in the language now? The DNA of Southeast Asians. ASEAN is one of the more active regional cooperation blocs implementing many of its agreements and declarations, including those or underscoring those declarations and agreements that has to do with trade and investments. It has also on the social front active work and agreements on social contracts on women and children, education and culture. However, in the area of migration, ASEAN is sadly quiet, kind of skirting around the issue, and very consciously neglecting the area of responsibility and accountability. Here is if you can see the map of Southeast Asia and Timor-Leste, you will find that multiculturalism and diversity is very rich. And you will find that this region has what we would call a lot of commonalities. On the other hand, when it comes to migrant workers, we have something like 6.5 million migrants from ASEAN and two ASEAN countries of destination. They represent a very neglected part of the population. The reason why we could not get a strong declaration for migrant workers' rights and dignity in the ASEAN is because what is primary to the ASEAN is the recognition of the sovereignty of each country to determine its own immigration policies on entry and conditions to remain. Although we have what we call, a visa-free entry for ASEAN citizens, the conditions for remaining in the country is very stringent. The other reason is the decision-making principle of consensus. Within the ASEAN region, we have at least 4 net migrant receiving countries, that is Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, and Brunei. When we raise the issue of migrants' rights and dignity in the ASEAN, immediately what is juxtaposed to us is the principle of non-interference in the affairs of each member country, which is why we don't get too much, we don't get a response, in fact, on what happened to Myanmar. Although there is a declaration of ASEAN on the Rohingya, when it came to the coup in Myanmar, ASEAN was pretty silent on that. And yet, what is beneficial to the receiving countries in the ASEAN, more liberal policies were adopted. For example, the entry and stay of skilled migrants, such as accountants, engineers, techies, medical professionals, particularly in this period, and media included. The diversity of the ASEAN and Timor-Leste, where migration has played a major role, and in its history, there had been in and out migration of Chinese, Indians, Polynesians, Melanesians, and Malays that contributed to its multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious, multilinguistic, gender, and class complexion. Can we move to the next slide, please? Now, this complexion of Southeast Asia and Timor-Leste could never be disregarded. But this character also should be able to bring out the richness of the Southeast Asian experience, including migration. Now, let me tell you a story where the media, as we are now addressing you, journalists and media people, the critical role that media plays in society and in particular in migration. The story that I will share with you now is just Suparmi's story. Otherwise, we'll go on and on with the next stories. But Suparmi is an Indonesian foreign domestic worker, which they Indonesians call the TKW or Tenaga Kerja Wanita. She is from Ponorogo, East Java. She worked in Hong Kong as a domestic worker. She took the drudgery of housework and the care of 2 young children without a single day of rest for more than a year. What broke the camel's back, so to say, for Suparmi was her not being paid her salary for a year. According to the employer, the money was paying for the cost of her recruitment. So for that period, she was wondering what has happened to her mother and to her children because they depended on her salary. So when she couldn't take it anymore, she asked her employer to leave employment, go home, or get another job. The employer said, no, you can't do that. You can only go back to Indonesia. And now. So he said, no, not that soon. But she was asked to pack her bags and showed the door that she will go there as soon as the recruitment agent comes to pick her up. When she refused to do this, she started shouting, which the Filipino neighbor heard and said, call the police, please. I want to go and complain. Fortunate for her, Hong Kong laws are working. So the police came and said, you cannot detain her inside the house, neither can you force her to go where she doesn't want to go. So the police released her and told the employer and the agent they had no right whatsoever to keep Suparmi. The Filipino brought her to the Asian Migrant Center, which was an office that assisted domestic workers of different nationalities. There she was advised to file a case and money claims with the Labor Department. So the next day she went to the Labor Department, but at the Labor Department, two consulate staff were waiting for her, and there was a tug of war between the consulate officials and the migrants who were trying to help Suparmi. A labor officer happily came out and told the consulate guys that they should leave Suparmi alone. And Suparmi came home, went back to the Asian Migrant Center, and started to call her friends and tell them, I'm okay, don't worry about me. The following day, 6 other Indonesians came to the center to file their own complaints. This time, the consulate was conscious of what was happening, was informed of what was happening by the recruitment agencies and the employers. So the consulate went to the AMC and tried to come to a compromise. According to them, they said, it's better to have a compromise. You know, this is the Asian way. So we will return the passports. We will allow them to go and process their cases, receive the money claims, and go home. In exchange, we will ask you not to breathe a word of this situation to the media in Hong Kong. The consulate knew the power of the media in Hong Kong. The takeaways, AMC could not make a decision, so the takeaways pleaded, saying, please agree to that because we only need the money so we can go home and give the money to our family. AMC had its partner organization in Jakarta and informed them that this is the situation, and if the women return to Jakarta to help them get safely to their homes. So 2 weeks passed and peace was there. Cases were in progress, but suddenly 2 takeaways on their way to the legal aid department were taken by 2 men from the consulate, brought to the airport and put on a plane to Jakarta. The women, so distressed, arrived in Jakarta, but did not go home because they were told by their family that when you arrive home, we will all be harassed. So they went straight to the partner organization and told their story. This angered the partner, and they called a press conference so that the families and the migrant workers can be interviewed. No one came, only the editor of Suara Pembaruhan, who responded and dispatched an investigative reporter to Hong Kong. To make a long story short, the journalist wrote the first story, and his media contact in Hong Kong collaborated to write a series of news stories that went front page in Jakarta and Hong Kong at the same time. It was, if it was in this day and age, it would have been called viral. From then on, media in Jakarta became bolder in reporting the abuses, not only in Hong Kong, but also in Singapore, Malaysia, and the Middle East. My friends, that was the day when the pen was mightier than the sword. It was hair-raising for us. But it took more than a decade or 2 to build the strength of migrant workers. Can we go to the next slide, please? The issues and problems of migrant workers in Southeast Asia is deep-rooted. Poverty, corruption, in our case, I would like to emphasize economic mismanagement. In the destination country, it is job security and the lack of social protection. I don't have to elaborate on the social protection. It has been discussed adequately by Mahi. The vulnerability of those in elementary jobs where they get arrested because they don't have a passport or they don't have an ID. But the multi-layered discrimination and xenophobia is one of the hurtful, to say the least, of the problems that migrant workers face every single day. To be shouted at in Chinese, in Bahasa, they don't understand, but they know it's a very bad language used to them. And that is a daily experience for many of the migrant workers. Because of the multi-diversity of the ASEAN, there is also the multi-layered discrimination of gender, of class, of nationality, of religion, and all those differences in the ASEAN and Timor-Leste. Other problems also had to do with the porous borders of the ASEAN region, where many of the migrant workers and their children end up stateless, end up trafficked because they don't have the proper documents and they are not able to go to a process to redress their grievances and have an identity problem. So we had Thais, for example, not Thais, that is, we had Karen women with fake documents trafficked to Taiwan. And in Taiwan, the labor attaché in Taiwan, the labor attaché of Thailand in Taiwan would not recognize them because they were not Thai citizens. So these are the issues and problems that were earlier elaborated. But 2 decades or so, migrant workers, mostly migrant women, were now building strength. That there was no way for them to just sit back, wait for the employer to be what they call transformed, or wait for the government to be enlightened. They had to act themselves. So came the Rights and Roots movement. Rights is about migrant workers claiming their rights and exercising them. The migrant domestic workers in Hong Kong were able to have labor attachés in Taiwan and in Hong Kong because they lobbied very strongly. The Thai consulate and the Thai government, labor department in Bangkok. The Indonesian migrant women were able to defy the orders of the Indonesian consulate to quietly go home if abused. After the Suparmi story, the Suparmi case, thousands literally came to the Asian Migrant Center to ask whether they would be able to be assisted if they filed complaints. What they did was not just to ask for help, but to organize themselves. Now the Indonesian migrants have a union, strongly unionized Indonesian migrant women, and they have a representation of the union from the different parts of Southeast Asia, a branch in Singapore and in Malaysia, and they have also in Indonesia. Interesting, for migrant domestic workers unions, who were part of the crafting of the ILO Convention 189. Sorry, it's not 181, it's 189. It is the standard setting of domestic workers. It has 31, I think, 31 countries that have ratified it. And it is the responsibility of the state party, when it ratifies that convention, to formalize the status of domestic workers in their country as part of the formal labor force. So this is a huge step for domestic workers. So in the many host countries, Singapore, Malaysia, what started as just hometown associations became unions, savings associations, coalitions, and alliances, even across nationalities. The momentum of Rights and Roots gave rise to many more campaigns. The Roots campaign is about addressing the root cause, which is poverty and joblessness. And so instead of going home in disarray and in bad shape, planning for going home must become a part of their preparation in the destination countries. Savings associations were organized in Singapore, Malaysia, Taiwan, Japan, Korea, and Hong Kong. Migrant families and partner organizations in the home countries were also organized to build the ground for acquiring assets, investing, and creating their own jobs. This may be a decade old, but I would like to share the Indonesian migrants in East Java from Blitar and from Jember, who were able to build businesses for themselves and for the community and create jobs for others in the community. So that is the Rights and Roots movement. At present, the campaigns are what they call the hands. Next slide, please. Our Hands campaign, which is peer education, teaching others their rights and joining into the whole movement. Recently, the Justice campaign for wage theft against migrants workers during COVID-19. When COVID-19 started, many employers just told their migrant workers to go home, and the migrant workers were also, worried about their situation and worried about their families. So going home was uppermost in their mind. But what happened was that their wages were not paid. Their travel costs were borne by the sending governments. Philippines had to charter planes to bring migrant workers back. Many of the employers just said, you want to go home, just like that. So right now, some of the migrant workers are filing cases, but then file cases to which office? The National Labor Commission in the Philippines is most of the time locked down. Next slide, please. Now, what was the impact of the pandemic on migrant workers? In the receiving countries, in the countries of destination, particularly the migrant workers had no access to health and medical services. In Thailand, for example, they were completely ignored. The priority is for the locals. The listing of people to be vaccinated are the locals. The migrant workers, they don't exist. In Singapore, there was already a big problem in the dormitories because there was no social distancing was taking place there. They did not have jobs, and so they were just huddled into the dormitories. And what do we expect in a situation like that? So many of the migrant workers had the problems of the COVID-19. And even vaccination to be paid by the migrant workers was not there because the supply of vaccines was limited. The loss of jobs and livelihood. This is, how do we say, an overarching problem where a loss of remittance by the household, a loss of remittance of the community, and loss of remittance of the economy is, in my country, is more than a tragedy. 10% of our GDP comes from remittances, and that's a lot. Now, what can a remittance do? Or what does a remittance do pre-COVID? It is used to pay for the schools. It is used to pay for the teachers. It is used to pay the drivers who bring students back and forth from school and back. It is used to buy food. It is used to pay the sellers, in the vendors, the market, the wet markets, the supermarkets. Without this, what happens? Without the remittances, then what happens? And the lack of capacity of government to respond to immediate and medium-term needs of returning migrant workers. Next slide, please. As I was telling the administrator of OWA, I said, how could we send migrant workers in millions and then not think of our capacity to provide for their needs, to provide for services? If you have, 7 to 10 million migrants out there, what is our capacity? How much social amelioration fund do we need? How many planes are we going to use to bring them back? For the pandemic, even now, some responses were coming from government. Singapore, for example, realizes that it cannot go on without the migrant labor. So it started to ease the re-entry and rehiring of migrant workers. I think the border between Singapore and Malaysia is starting to ease up because during the pandemic, all the workers from Malaysia who were day workers in Singapore could not enter Singapore. There was a lockdown, closed Singapore. And those Malaysian workers who were in Singapore are unable to go to Malaysia. So they stayed in Singapore without any job. But now Singapore is reopening the hiring of construction workers, including domestic workers. It has also introduced reforms in the household services scheme. In the destination, in the home countries, Philippines, for example, is providing cash assistance, free vaccination, hotel and meals, but only for something like 500,000 migrants. What is happening to the rest of the migrant workers? Next slide, please. Exactly how many migrant workers are coming home? This is something that perhaps you in the media would like to know. and tell people how many are coming home, because what we only get from the media is how many were vaccinated, how many were not vaccinated, how many were unserved. There are those who are stranded, the seafarers who are unable to land, those unable to leave the destination countries because there is no flight. What? These are areas that media has not really talked about. And coming home with a jobless rate, we had something like 17% unemployment added to the existing unemployment rate already. Clearly, it is not business as usual. Is there any plan of government or private sector? What is the recruitment agencies planning? Is there a foreign employment industry to look at? Next slide, please. Next slide. Before COVID, return and reintegration, save and invest as a strategy was already part of the whole campaign. And migrant workers who saved and invested, as we studied it, were in a much better situation, especially those who invested in agriculture, particularly in the COVID period when food supply chain had to be to continue to be vibrant. Supply of food in the stores, supply of rice, supply of these things. They had to be vibrant. Otherwise, people will go hungry, particularly in the cities. So I just have this tale of two Mrs. Mrs. X, who saved and invested and started to how do you say, redeem her land, which she has mortgaged when she went out of the country. And upon redemption, was able to go back and farm the land. Now it is a flourishing piece of asset that supports her family and provides jobs to her neighbors. Mrs. Y invested in a resort in one of the islands where surfing has become an attraction. So she has built a resort, a building, and purchased all the paraphernalia for surfing and all those things, restaurant and all. When COVID came, there was a lockdown. And so suddenly no customers were coming. But happily, she was able to have assets that could be diverted to some other use. So she used it as a kitchen, a community kitchen, and people were flocking into that area and started to donate food for the others who were really having difficulties with their food supply. Next slide, please. Next one, please. Next one, yeah. Now here are some issues to interrogate. And as media would like to contribute to rebuilding an equitable, a more equitable, unprejudiced, and economically robust societies. The biggest challenge of migrant workers is coming home to an economy that is in disarray. And the light at the end of the tunnel, or the going away of COVID, is not going to be a scenario that we can see in the next few years. It's living with or without COVID. Still, will the economy and labor migration as we know it be the same again? The call for this time is job creation, and it should be the work of the whole of society. There are many recommendations being pushed forward by ADB, by ILO, as to how to normalize the situation under COVID. It's a cooperation of the three sectors that are wealth creating in a society. The private business should harness its capital and technology to sustain their jobs with a lot of care. The social sector, where many migrants are, should engage in entrepreneurial activity and create employment, particularly in the micro, small, and medium industries where they have that kind of skill and capacity. There is this small group of young people who joined the UNDP Youth Challenge for Innovation, who are selling the products of bajaus, you know, the Filipino sea gypsies, to Kuala Lumpur. And the income that they get is used to run the schools of the children of these bajaus who are considered stateless in Malaysia. Those are some of the contributions, small stories as it is called, but they are the ones that make the local economy move. They are the small wheels of local economy that continue to support the social sector. Now, the public sector, although it is already overstretched because of COVID expenses, must support in terms of financial and policy reforms that can lead to a rebooting of the economy. I say rebooting because the economy as it is now is unable to cope with pandemics and problems of this magnitude. And this is particularly addressed to countries of origin like the Philippines. I think there is a lot to do in this area, and we cannot afford to be paralyzed because of COVID. We may be slow in our movements physically, but our minds should be faster in developing innovative and creative ideas to overcome the difficulties that we meet small, slowly, but also contribute to a macroeconomic change. Thank you very much. I hope I have challenged you enough. Thank you. Thank you, Ajinder.
Thank you very much for that, Maria. And I can't agree more with your succinct observation about how migration has characterized the DNA of the region, and in sharp contrast, how ASEAN has miserably failed to protect migrant workers who are exploited by their employers. And thank you for that very astute presentation. And now our next speaker is Pichit Phromkade, who is the Communications Officer for the joint ILO-UN Women Safe and Fair program. As part of the EU-UN Spotlight initiative to eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls, he is responsible for content research and production in the regional context, and leads public outreach efforts and campaigns to improve knowledge and attitudes on the rights and contributions of migrant workers, especially women migrants in the ASEAN region. Prior to the ILO, he worked in the field of communications over the past 10 years in various international organizations, including the United Nations Volunteers Program, the British Council, and the Expressen, a Swedish national multi-channel newspaper. And now, over to you, Pichit.
Thank you so much, Mahi, for your kind introduction. And first of all, I would like to thank you for SEAFORE program and the Academy as well for having me. It's a really great pleasure to be here and speak with you all. But personally, I would like to meet everyone in person instead of sitting here using the Zoom, because I truly believe that nothing can replace the direct human interaction. Anyway, without further ado, I like to start my presentation, but I have a question. Agenda, since you are now managing the presentation, would you mind changing the slides for me as well?
Okay, sure. I'll share my screen then.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that would be great.
Here you go.
Thank you. Right, so my session today, I will be presenting the key findings of the ILO UN Women recent study on the public attitudes towards migrant workers in the ASEAN region, especially in the countries of destination, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and Japan. The reason why Japan is included is because Japan has becoming one of the main country destination for migrant workers from the ASEAN region. And that is why it is included in our study. Before I start, I would like to also note that this study was conducted in 2019 and it was launched in December 2019, just a few months before the COVID-19 hit the ASEAN region. So, the findings of the research may not reflect the COVID-19 context, but we will see, and we will have the conversation afterwards about this. Next slide, please. So what I will be presenting to you folks is that the trends in labor migration in the ASEAN region, and then the selected findings from the study and the way forwards. Next, please. So just to give you a little bit of the background of this study, it is done jointly by two programs. One is the Safe and Fair program, which is a joint ILO UN Women program, and the Triangle ASEAN program, which is another program under the implementation. So as you can see here on the screen, the map. So the United Nations estimates that between now and 2013, the share of the population aged older will increase in the ASEAN region. So migrant workers will be needed more to fill labor shortages in key sectors, especially in manufacturing, in domestic and care work, services, and agriculture. As per the map, you see here, dependency ratios or shares of the non-working population in relation to the working population through the region are changing. So higher dependency ratios suggest that there are gaps in the labor market generally, with fewer workers per population. Next, please. So now let's see the trends in labor migration in the ASEAN region. Next, please. Right, thank you. So the ILO estimates that in 2017, the number of migrant workers in the ASEAN region is around 11.6 million, and half of that, nearly half of it, are women, representing 5.2 million. So as you can see, the figure shows that near equal of the share of women migrant workers across the region are women. So women are a big part of labor migration in the region. Next, please. Also, from the last 8 or 9 years, the number of women in the outflows of nationals for employment has also increased. Let me give you the example of some countries in our region. So in Indonesia, from 57% to 80%, and in Laos PDR from 46% to 52%, in Vietnam from 33% to 40%, and in Cambodia from 32% to 40%, and from Myanmar from 24% to 35%. Next, please. So the vast majority of migrant workers in our region, almost 90% of migrant workers in Brunei, in Malaysia, in Singapore and Thailand, they work in the service and industry sectors. And I think everybody knows that more women migrant workers are working in service sector than any other sectors. So what does it say here? Women are still on the move, actually more, and migrant workers can be, I mean, labor migration can be a tool of empowerment because through labor migration, migrant workers can learn new skills, they can support themselves, they can support their families, and they can also become more financially independent. Next, please. And this table, let me give you the example of the main countries of destination in the ASEAN region: Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand. As you can see that the number of migrant workers in these 3 countries are a lot. Actually, in Malaysia, almost 2 million migrant workers are currently residing and working. In Singapore, 1.3 million, and in Thailand, up to 2.7 million. And they make up a significant part of labor markets in the countries of destination. So in 2019, as you can see, the stock of international migrant workers in ASEAN countries of destination has been increasing a lot. Even though we see some effects of the COVID-19 towards migrant workers, a lot of them are now on the move. They're going to their countries of origin, but that doesn't mean that the need of migrant workers in our region are decreasing. This could be just a short temporary trend, but if you look at the bigger picture, the trend is still valid. That the ASEAN region, especially in Thailand, will soon become an aging society, and with that, more migrant workers will be needed, and they will. A lot of countries would need them to fill the labor shortage. Next, please. Now let's see the public attitudes towards migrant workers. Here are some of the headlines that I would like to highlight. I think Mahi has already mentioned about this already in her presentation, that you can see that migrant workers are still on the headlines. Be it negative or positive, we will talk about that. But I just want you to see that, you know, some of them are based on myth or false beliefs. Some of them are based on facts. Let's see why. Next, please. When we did the large-scale survey, we asked the public, what effect do migrant workers have on the national economy? The answers were quite polarized. As you can see that in Singapore, about 58% say that an overall positive net effect. Meanwhile, in Thailand and in Malaysia and in Japan, the perception towards migrant workers is that they have a kind of more negative impact on the national economy. So this is something that is interesting, and especially in Thailand, a lot of public believe that migrant workers are actually taking their jobs, but that is not true, because we know that around 3.3 to 6% of the GDP are from migrant workers. So they contribute to the economy of the country, and they feel the labor shortage, just like I mentioned before. So it's not that they're taking the jobs of the local people. And migrant workers are making crucial contributions to their countries of origin as well as destination. Many countries in the region, again, rely on migrant workers for the functioning of their countries. So migrant workers, including women migrants, make up a significant share of the total workforce and contribute to the wage growth of the region. Next, please. Another finding that I find very interesting is when we ask the public about crimes, they say that migrants and crime are related. But is that true? So there is the relationship between labor migration and crime, however, is an issue that is not so well understood by the people in general. There is very little evidence to back up the claim that migrant workers are more likely to commit crimes than the rest of the population or than local people, unless lack of documentation is considered a crime. So painting migrant workers as criminals only fosters suspicion, discord, and lack of social cohesion in the society. So it is very unhealthy for our community to paint them as criminals. Next, please. And here are some quotes that I would like to show you. Can you, yes, okay. So as you can see the quotes, some believe that migrant workers do commit more crimes and associate area inhabited by migrant workers or foreigners as having more crime. On the contrary, others argued that the connection between migrant workers and crime is just only fictional and it's not based on facts. Next, please. When asked about agenda, can we move to the next slide? There we are. Yes, thank you. So when we ask about social inclusion and social and cultural threat, the results are quite alarming. The perceptions of migrant workers as social and cultural threat, as you can see in Malaysia and Thailand, the perception that migrant workers threaten their country's culture and heritage is notably high. As you can see, a high percentage of them. So it suggests that trust building in Malaysia and Thailand should particularly be a target of any interventions. So I would like to give, to leave a question to you, like, as journalists, what could be your intervention to help us debunk the myth? Next, please. So now comes to the support for issues related to social inclusion. Again, as you see that the public were surveyed on whether migrant women should be allowed to marry citizens or bring their children with them when they are migrating, as well as attitudes on offering migrants a path to citizenship, neither of which are allowed for elementary skilled or elementary migrant workers in Japan, Malaysia, or Singapore. However, in Thailand, so the Thai government does not restrict marriages, and though children are not part of the documented MOU immigration process, in law, they are given access to the Thai education system, regardless of their status. Next, please. When it comes to equal treatment with national, the public across the 4 destination countries hold a fundamental view that migrant workers should not be treated differently, and that discrimination, however, is not a problem. Unfortunately, this kind of discrimination can lead to unequal treatment, and women migrant workers can even be more at risk of violence and harassment. Next, please. Interestingly, when asked whether women migrant workers specifically should have equal wages with women nationals doing the same job, only majorities in Japan, around 60%, and Thailand, again, 60%, supported this. Next, please. Now let's look at support for maternity leave and pregnant migrant workers. In Malaysia and Singapore, there is this, the government have imposed legal restrictions subjecting women migrant workers to pregnancy discrimination and sanctions during all the phases of their migration, be it recruitment, employment, and termination. So women are required to perform a pregnancy test before their departure from their country of origin, and also to repeat it on an annual basis. And should the test be positive, the women will be deported at her own expense. Next, please. Now let's continue to look at the support for women migrant workers who experience violence. There is evidence to suggest negative attitudes towards women migrant workers, and that create barriers to their access to essential services in case of violence against women. Women migrant workers may struggle, however, to access services due to perceptions around their respectability, or due to, sadly, victim blaming. Pervasive negative attitudes can also further isolate migrant women, restricting their movement and preventing them from seeking support due to fear of reprisals. Next, please. So with all of this evidence that we have, so what can we do? As we are journalists, we have the tools and we have the platform, right? So let's see what we can do. Next, please. Here are some recommendations. So as media professionals, we can promote the facts, the evidence of the benefits of migrant workers, right? And we can also help breaking the stereotype and the stigma that is widespread at the moment, especially during the COVID-19, as we know that now many of migrant workers are going back to their countries of destination, and they have faced a lot of backlash, and they also have to face with discrimination. Many of them were stigmatized as the disease carriers. You know, they have faced these challenges reintegrating back to their communities. So we can ensure that the content or the messaging that we report does not promote migrant workers, especially women, as victim or inherently vulnerable, right? Because by doing so, instead of making labor migration as an empowering tool, it, on the contrary, will paint that picture that this is a consequence. If you migrate, this is a consequence. This is what will happen to you. But we don't want to do that. We want to make labor migration as an empowering tool for migrant workers, especially women. And also, in the absence of direct interaction with migrant workers, we know that public attitudes toward them are often shaped by one-sided portrayal or the false information, hate speech, stereotyping, or even xenophobia. And this results in misperceptions of the role they play in our society, which can condone discrimination and even violence against women migrant workers. So, with the tools and the channels we have, we should come together to address harmful stereotypes and shine the spotlight on the issues of violence and harassment toward migrant workers, especially women. Next, please. What else can we do? So we, as the media, we can help shape the public attitudes towards migrant workers. Well, the language we use we know that it can put forward specific positioning and impressions, including at times perpetuating stereotypes. So therefore, it is very, very important to be clear about terms and definitions related to women migrant workers and violence against women, and establishing a common ground from which to have conversations and to work towards the society or even the world in which labor rights are respected for all, and one in which migrant workers' voice, choice, and agency is recognized. Now, I like to wrap up my last slide with inclusive terminology. Next slide, please. can you go back to the previous slide? Thank you. So these are the oh, we go right. Okay, I'm sorry. My there's some delay on my side. So okay, now we have this slide up. So these are the terms that we really encourage to use because they are right-based, and there are many words that we have seen in the media, unfortunately, that does not empower migrant workers, and at times stereotype migrant workers, and in the back, of the reader's mind, it shaped some forms of perceptions and attitudes toward migrant workers. So instead of saying sending countries or home countries, we encourage to use the term country of origin. Why? Because the word sending country carries the connotation that the state would take an active part in making workers leave the country to find employment and residence abroad. Similarly, the word country of destination or destination country is encouraged to use because the term, if you say the receiving countries or the host country, this term implies that migrants are a guest, and since they are a guest, they are not part of our community. Another term that I would like to put an emphasis on is irregular status migrant workers or undocumented migrant workers. This word should be used instead of illegal migrant. Why? Because the word illegal migrant is seen as stigmatizing and associated with criminality. And a person can never be illegal just because being a person. Being a human being, being a person is not illegal. Their action can be illegal, but being a person, being a human being is not illegal. And that is why we encourage to use the word undocumented migrant instead. So that's it from me. Ajinda, if you can put the last slide up so that our colleagues here can have further resource. And this is my email address. If you have further questions, you can also reach out to me as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pichit. That was an insightful presentation, but I must say the fact that migrant workers will be needed more in various sectors such as services, agriculture, manufacture, due to the gaps in the labor market, raises even more concerns given the fact that, ASEAN governments don't seem to have proper policy mechanisms to support and to put in safety mechanisms. And that makes it even more imminent for us to be able to, together with our media friends, lobby for a more inclusive and comprehensive social protection policy, and especially those tailored to protect women workers. So thank you very much. And now it's time for me to introduce our last speaker. Didik Eko Pujianto is the Deputy Chief of Mission at the Indonesian Embassy in Singapore. Didik has a background in law from Brawijaya University, Malang, and international relations from McGill University, Canada. Throughout his career, Didik has taken many foreign diplomatic assignments in Switzerland, South Korea, and Singapore, as well as the Indonesian Consulate General in Kota Kinabalu, Malaysia. He is also a regular contributor to the Jakarta Post. Over to you, Didik. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahi, and good evening, everybody. It is interesting to be here with all of very good and very resourceful persons this evening. First of all, I would like to Oh, let me share my presentation. Yes. First of all, about the data, it is interesting.
Sorry, Mr. Didik, if I can just interrupt. You need to click on present.
Presence. Wait.
You see it right on the top right-hand corner. You see the
Oh, yes,
share?
yes. Okay.
Just click on that. Yes, thank you.
Yes, okay. Yes, first of all, it is interesting that everybody try to present about the data. And it seems to us the data, and there are many differences on the data. Like the first speakers, Bu Maria, explaining that the foreign worker in ASEAN approximately about 12 millions, and then also she also saying that it's what 11.8 million, and my presentation it should be 12 million, not 2 million actually. This is reflecting that the data itself, it is still debatable because every single country, every single institutions not try to reveal the exact data about the migrant workers. So we can understand why and then who responsible about the data, why they cannot reveal the exact data, and so on and so forth. Because as already stated by the previous speakers, that many peoples, including the institutions, companies, and even the government agencies, not to reveal the exact data about the working foreign workers. This is the interesting point that maybe being a journalist, our colleagues who are joined this program can try to collect some more information and dig more into this kind of facts. And then second thing that I would like to share, which is actually similar to other our previous speakers, is the fact that in the ASEAN countries, the economic development, economic growth is very different. So the countries like in mine, sorry. Yes. On the table, it is clearly stated, among the 10 ASEAN countries, at least 7 member countries, it can be called as country of origins, while 3 of them, like Singapore, and then Brunei, and Malaysia, actually the country of destination. But for Malaysia, at the same time, become both country of origin and also country of destination. And through this table, we can see the role of foreign workers towards the economy of the country of origins. To remittance, we can see actually in many data and many resources. We can double check whether in the World Bank or maybe in the national economic institutions. So our colleague from any of the media and the local media can try to double check the remittance of each of the foreign workers in its own country. And now we are touching on the medium and long-term factors that will help shape labor migration in Asia. Of course, everybody already explaining about the impact of the pandemic during the COVID-19, almost every country are facing similar problem. And now the economic recovery become the tagline of every single country. So that's why, because of the economic growth, economic development slowing down, then of course, the unemployment rate in every single country also going down. So this is one of the challenges by most of the country, that of course, the country of origin of the foreign workers. So this is one of the most important. And another factor is the use of technology. We are all aware that most of the country try to use the technology rather than the labor-intensive companies. By using technology in many countries like in Indonesia, in Vietnam, Cambodia, and so on and so forth. So it will improve the number of unemployment. So those who have less skill, then they have to find out another jobs outside of their own country. And of course, the sluggishness of the economic growth and developments because of many situations, especially during the pandemic, and push every peoples who are less skilled and unemployed to go everywhere. This is the interesting fact. And the last factor is the political instability or insecurity in the country of origins. Maria and also Pichit already explaining that the situation in Myanmar right now push everybody in this country try to find out a better job outside of their own country. And foreign workers actually in some country, it can be called a development engine. Just take an example in Malaysia, especially in the palm oil sector in Malaysia. From the data, you can see that many percentage of agriculture sector become source of the GDP of Malaysia. And especially for the palm oil, also supporting and providing many percentage of the GDP. And maybe Maria later on can share with us that in Sabah and Malaysia, the people who are working in palm oil sector, almost all of them are from Indonesia and from Philippines. And it's almost unreplaceable by any nationals. So it can become part of the development engine. But as already discussed before, the treatment, the way the receiving country treat and look after of the foreign workers in those sectors, there are a lot of questions on that one. So there are a lot of questions on that one. And of course, Maria already explaining many examples about the cases. On the palm oil sector, there are thousands or maybe tens of thousands cases actually down there. A point for discussion, contract. If we are talking about the contract of the foreign workers, especially in the palm oil or maybe in the manufacturers, it only stated only 2 years, while by nature, palm oil plantations, it takes until 20 or 30 years. So this is not, can be considered just based on the contract, which is only 2 years. While palm oil should be taken care until 30 years. So this is the problem and also the challenge faced by the companies who are working in this sector. And at the same time, the regulations on employing foreign workers, of course, not until specifically stated until 25 or 30 years. So this is one of the and the people who are working in specific sector in a certain country, it's also can be called irreplaceable. As mentioned before, for example, domestic workers, caregiver, manufacturing and construction, even food server, cleaners, healthcare, public transport. It's not easy to find out the replacement from local people or even from other countries. And of course, the way the local government, the way the receiving country or destination country in treating them, it should be much more better compared to the previous, that is rising many cases and of course many critics. And of course, we also see some problems, some challenges in this point. Specifically in this sector, there are points for further discussions because already mentioned before, the high cost of employing foreign workers. And of course, it will become a prolonged and uncertainties about salary cuts. And it's also happened not only workers from ASEAN countries, but also from other nationals. And then unclear cost structure, minimum wage versus free markets, and then work-related dispute that end up with criminal accusations. There are a lot of problems in this specific sector. And we are all quite aware actually, all of these problems rise because of the excessive role of the recruitment or placement agency, which is private sector. And in many countries, including in the destination or the origin country, actually the companies call, the agency called companies. So the way they treat foreign workers is not quote unquote, not human. They just company. If you take our company, it's like goods. This is actually the interesting point of view. All of the journalists can dig further, can explore further to try to find out the root of the problem and also write good and maybe propose to the government or to the institutions who are responsible for that better policy. And then the availability of job versus unemployment. This is actually related to the economic downturns because of the economic growth and economic development faced by the pandemic. So every country facing similar situations about the economic recovery and of course the unemployment. And of course there are many choices, whether it is in the origin country or destination country, in choosing the sector that is much more labor intensive or maybe capital intensive. Maybe the one of the alternative is small and medium enterprises that can be chosen to accommodate more unemployment. And then coordination between national legislation, policy, alignment, and intergovernment collaboration platform. As already mentioned by Mahi, that the regional arrangements within the ASEAN, even the Mahi underlined that ASEAN become like the toothless tiger, because in this case, specifically about the migrant workers, the instruments just instruments. There is no legally binding scheme that can be applied by every country in this specific sector. But at least in certain origin country, there's special agency that designed and established for the purpose of taking care of these issues. For instance, in Philippines, they have special institutions, and in Indonesia, also special institute on that. And of course, it should be bilateral cooperations between country of origin and the destination country. As I mentioned before, the example for the Indonesia, we have special agency for the protection of Indonesian migrant workers, while Philippines have Philippine Overseas Employment Administrations. Of course, in the country like Cambodia, Myanmar also has its own specific agency. How far the agencies can really taking care of those migrants who are in this category can be protected by this agency. So our colleague from every single country can make try to have a kind of further studies and then can review the outcome. Of course, the preparations of the migrant workers before they going abroad, that's the most important part. Otherwise, they will face many problems since the beginning on. And we can discuss further later on about the unprepared workers, less skilled, healthy, and also the responsibility of the private company that arrange the placement, the responsibility of the private sector, and many countries call it companies or agencies on this matter. And we have a lot of problems because the responsibility of the private company is very minimum. And at the end, they just rely on the government. And of course, with many limitations and also the specific arrangement which is not in place, the role of the representative, foreign representative in every each country is also very limited. Now I would like to touch on the issue or maybe the terminology that is not really correct, but it's always around quite some time. Issues like illegal, undocumented, and unprocedural. Maybe some people mix up between those three wording, but let me share because not every scheme from one country to another can be applied 100% similar to others. For instance, the terminology of unprocedural, it's actually applied for Indonesians to Malaysia and from Indonesian to Singapore. Why? Because those two countries accepting free visa scheme, tourist visa, entering this country, and at the end can be switched to become working permit. So that's why it is not easy for everybody to reveal the real data of the foreign workers, either the sending country or origin country or destination country, because the procedure is different. It's also happened for foreign workers in the Middle East, because some of the Middle East countries also allowing the people who are coming to Middle East countries using tourist visa or visit visa, and at the end can be switched to working permit. Now, I would like to move on the social and political impact of these foreign workers. In many countries, the foreign workers can rise and become social discourse. In Malaysia, for example, as already mentioned by Mahi, a lot of discussions because of the status of the foreign workers, whether documented or undocumented, legal or illegal, and then every single society, every single group began questioning about the role of the migrant workers. On the one hand, they are needed by companies, whether it is in the plantation sector or agriculture, manufacture, and even domestic sector. But on the other hand, there are also many problems arise because of the mismanagement, the way they handle the foreign workers not properly. They become illegal. They're not illegal, but they are become illegal. When they come into the country, they provided with proper document, proper passport, proper contracts for at least 2 years. But after arriving in the country, because of several problems, several reasons, maybe treated not correctly, and then he or she ran away, he or she tried to move from one company to another company and not properly arranged, then become illegal. So this kind of scheme become issues in the political and also social for the receiving country. And the questions, because of these many problems actually on the ground, how the country of origins and the destination country can cooperate with each other. And this is actually not easy for everybody in the ASEAN. As mentioned before, the regional arrangements not clearly and also can be applied directly because there is no law enforcement mechanism. While bilateral agreement, it is also not easy because not every single arrangements between country A and country B has its own agreement or specific agreement like memorandum of understanding. And if there is, but the applications and the law enforcement of the MOU not as expected. So at least another forum like communications, bilateral cooperation in specific sector, especially migrant workers, can be established and become a forum for bilateral communication between the country of origin and the destination country. Even though it is not easy, but we also see discussions much better compared to this no discussion at all, because we have some experience on that matters. The private company try to stay away from the problem, and then the employer just throwing away of the problem. And at the end, whether it is a government representative or NGO coming into and giving help to many problems. And now I would like to come to the summary of my presentations. the best way to overcome and try to find out the unemployment problem is the creating jobs, which is of course not easy during and after the pandemic. It needs time, of course, but every single country also trying to do in this scheme and its own path. And of course, economic development will become solutions, but still the economic disparity among the countries will result in the unemployment and also the push factor for the people who would like to find out jobs outside their own country. And the most important thing in solving the problem and seeing the problem is the way the country of origin and the country of the destination try to seek better ways, discuss and make arrangements, try to overcome what happens, at least trying to provide correct and proper data. Because up to now, we have many problems about data itself. Some institutions say that the data of migrant workers in certain country is, let's say, 100,000. Another institutions, 150,000. It seems to us it's not that difficult actually, because every single person who are living and working in certain country, it should be recorded by the immigrations. But the problems, not every single immigration in every single country revealing this kind of data, sharing those data. This also become one of the very challenging situations. And of course, with the help of NGO, and of course, with the role of the journalists, any problems, any delicate problems on the foreign workers situations, which is very prone to any kind of situation, can be explored further and can be tried to make it public, and then the governments, the private sector, society, and also the foreign workers itself realize what is going on, where he or she would like to call and try to seek help. And also for the government especially, can try to discuss further about the possibility to trying to find out the best solutions. And last, I would like to share about the Indonesian experience. Maybe Mahi and also our colleague in Kuala Lumpur have access about the data shelter in Indonesian embassy in Kuala Lumpur. There are hundreds every single day, hundreds of Indonesian foreign workers. Hundreds people, meaning hundreds problems. And already explaining by Mahi, during the COVID, there are thousands, tens of thousands Indonesian foreign workers in Peninsula, in Sabah, in Sarawak, left behind by any programs. Our representative in Kuala Lumpur, our Consulate General in Penang, in Kuching, in Sabah, they are struggling to share staple food, to distribute staple food in every corner of the country. It is very challenging and it's quite a touchy situation. And Singapore also, we have small shelter. taking care almost every day. The minimum is 50, the highest is 200. And of course, there are some NGOs in Singapore, in Malaysia, also helping solving the problem of the migrant workers. Because if every problem should be addressed by the government or its representative, we have limited capacity. And of course, with the cooperations between the governments, NGO, society, including the journalists, we can reveal further about the problems and try to work hand in hand to find out the best solutions, at least trying to make everybody knows about the real problems of the foreign workers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Didik. I totally understand what you say when you talked about the aid distribution. Just to give you a short story, a few weeks, Charles Santiago, and when there are migrant workers in Klang, in his constituency, who ask us for food, we normally approach his office and he distributes on our behalf. So a few weeks back, there was a request from 16 Indonesian migrant workers who said that they hadn't eaten in a week. So we approached him and he immediately sent aid through one of his women counselors. And what happened was the Indonesian migrant workers, upon receiving the groceries, knelt down and said thank you. And the woman broke down in tears. And when that story was recounted to me, I had tears in my eyes as well, because it's such a difficult situation on the ground, actually. And thank you also for correctly pointing out that many migrant workers who work in the manufacturing, construction sectors as domestic workers and caregivers are irreplaceable, but continue to be discriminated upon by their governments. So now we move on to the forum. And Ajinda and Adib, I think what I will do is I will also pick up some of the questions from the chat, from those who have been listening in, so that can be incorporated. So Didik, starting with you, you spoke about, this, I know that there's been lots of discussion, or I stand corrected, but I do know that there's been lots of discussions between the Indonesia and Malaysia. But why is it that nothing concrete has been done to do away with labor or employment agent or the third party? And how much of a role does corruption play in ensuring that these unscrupulous labor agents get away from the grips of power?
Thank you, Mahi, for the very interesting questions. This is actually very challenging because the discussions, bilateral communication between the two countries happens many, many times. But the communications in the national level, which is from the headquarters in Jakarta and Kuala Lumpur, while the problem on the grounds actually completely different between the people who are working in the peninsula and the people who are working in Sabah and Sarawak. And the people who are working in the plantation, palm oil plantations, is also completely different compared to the people who are working in the manufacture or construction sector. And many discussions cannot come to a conclusions. Problems still there. And it seems to me it should be addressed specifically. If we would like to discuss about the people who are living in the plantation sector, it should be focused on that one. Because as I mentioned before, the plantation sector, it can be 25 until 30 years, while the contract only 2 years. So by nature, the plantation company setting up base camp for the people who are working in those companies. And of course, by setting up the base camp, not only tens, but hundreds and even thousands 1,000 people living together, it is impossible all are men. It should be women. And of course, there are a lot of children, many children in Sabah, tens of thousands children in Sabah. They are undocumented. Even when they are married, they're not registered. So when they have children, they also not registered. But recently, finally, the government of Indonesia and Malaysia come to a conclusion. They can provide all the children with the passport, can provide those who are married with the marriage certificate, so they can have a kind of legal ground for the marriage itself and also their children. And up to now, the contracts for the people who are working in the plantation sector still 2 years. How come? They can 2 years and then extended another 2 years, and the maximum only can be extended 2 times. After that, they come back to Indonesia and then return to Sabah with the new contract. Whenever they return with the new contract, it can be considered completely new. Whenever they completely new, then the deductions of the salary can be extended again. This is not easy situation for the people who are working in the plantation sector. While in the domestic sector, it is also completely different. Those who are working in Sabah and Sarawak and those who are working in Peninsula. Those who are working in Sabah and Sarawak, mostly from the eastern part of Indonesia, while those who are working in Peninsula, they are working from Sumatra or Java. The nature is different, the arrangement is different, and the players, private players, is also different. And the interesting point by Maria, what so-called corruption. To be frank, there are some people or institutions which is those who are arranging the scheme not properly or incorrect actually. That's my.
Okay, like you said just now, I have had the privilege of actually going to the shelter run within the compound of the Indonesian embassy, and I do see, yeah, like you say, scores of people, primarily women from the domestic, who are domestic workers who have been through severe trauma and exploitation by Malaysian employers. But Maria, just now you said that even though migration characterizes the DNA of Southeast Asia, and I cannot agree more, but ASEAN chooses to stay silent on issues relating to migration, and also especially in recognition of its own sovereignty, especially on immigration policies. And of course, it throws in the principle of non-interference as and when it pleases. So with this, with the emphasis on sovereignty of nations, with the emphasis on immigration law, with the emphasis on the non-interference policy, which is archaic, how relevant is ASEAN today, especially when we are battling the COVID-19 pandemic, which has adversely affected and continues to affect vulnerable population, not just the migrant workers, but also refugees and others?
I think regional alliances have a role to play in smoothing the relationships and addressing the problems that would otherwise be confrontational if there was no such a regional forum for that. It is still a platform for dialogue, as Didik was saying. It's better to dialogue and maybe find a solution or not find a solution than keeping away from each other. I think that is a role that ASEAN is playing. It has put premium on certain issues and certain areas of relations. For example, trade and investment is something that they are very interested in, because all of the ASEAN countries want to have investments from outside to come in, from the EU, from the US, from Australia, things like those. Now, if they come like all running, competing, and race to the bottom kind of thing without a decent agreement among themselves, I think that would not be a good image for ASEAN, for countries in the ASEAN.
Okay.
Labor migration is taking a backseat. It is a, how would we say? It is a symbol of still the status of migrant workers that is there, of the low skilled and the low skilled, sorry Pichit, it's elementary jobs, and the discrimination that is taking place. It is there, even among those who are well-intentioned advocates. It is there. That, like they say, if you have a white person, scratch the surface and you will find that there is racism, which, is difficult to believe, but there are very few exceptions. But that's a kind of thing that comes, yeah.
Pichit, how would you agree with Maria, who says that, it's okay for us to still continue engaging with ASEAN, however irrelevant it can be, especially because you said that, there has, based on the study that you talked about, there is going to be a need for more and more migrant workers. So do you think we need an alternative that can actually deal with these issues of exploitation, labor exploitation, and whatever else, given the fact that there's going to be an increase in migrant workers, given the fact that the pandemic is here to stay, and also given the fact that ASEAN will continue to be a toothless tiger?
Thank you, Mahi. First of all, I like to say that we need to accept the fact that migrant workers play a big part in our society. They contribute to our economy and to our society in the ASEAN region. There are lots and lots of numbers and figures that prove that migrant workers feel the labor shortage in our region. Not only, I'm talking about men and women. So once we accept that, we need more migrant workers, right? And that the public attitudes that we have towards them as well. For example, we have seen from our research that a lot of people think that the work that women migrant workers do is less of value than the national workers do, or it less of values than the work of men do. But we know that that is not true. That is not true. So I think with the better attitudes, it can result in better policies for migrant workers. So yeah, I think the fundamental thing is that there is a need of the ASEAN community to build the environment where migrant workers can live and can work with no fear, with no discrimination. And with that as a starting point, I guess, and I believe that there will be more inclusive policies or even gender responsive policies for migrant workers.
Thank you, Pichit. Didik, there's a question from Rosa Garcia from Timor Post. So her question is, what is the advantage or disadvantage for the migrant workers who enter countries with tourist visa and then legalize it? Because this is done in East Timor. So do you think this is a viable option?
Yes, actually, for the worker itself, who has some good information to work abroad without the help of anybody, they can use and utilize free visa coming to the certain countries that provide that facilities. and then having discussion with the local employers, and then the employer agreed to arrange and employing him or her, and then the employer trying to manage everything in the local institution, and then switch his or her free visa to become a working permit. But the problems, especially in Singapore, in Malaysia, and also in the Middle East, they're not provided with the proper document like contract. They have no knowledge at all about the rights and the obligations. Some yes, because they're quite literate enough in reading through the contract. So at any time they're facing problem, they can try to solve the problem with the employer itself. But in many cases, because they know nothing about the contract, some actually provided with the contract, just sign in the last page. But the first, second, and the third page, they know nothing at all. At any time they're facing problem, even there is no contract. So this is actually one of the pro and cons about the people who can try to switch the free visa to working permit. And of course, we understand. So the professional person, actually, they're free to choose to go everywhere in the world. They can arrange their own traveling. They can arrange their own working. Even many people actually using this kind of scheme. But for the people who are working in the very low skill sectors, that's become problems.
Okay, thank you. Maria, there is a question for you from Indonesia. Do you have data about how many migrant workers saved and invested before pandemic?
That is data that is difficult. What we can have straightforward, I'll share with you. Individuals and groups in Indonesia, for example, who have saved, invested, and prospered. Migrant workers in East Java, migrant workers in what is this? In North Sumatra, migrant workers in Bogor. They have established some kind of business. They've established livestock farms. They have put up restaurants, and they have put up, there is a very interesting, what they call this, hot spring spa in Kota Batu by a migrant worker. We have those examples, and the Indonesian government has been promoting this kind of reintegration for migrant workers, and I think it would be a good idea if Didi, you can encourage some groups in Indonesia to track these reintegration initiatives so that they become models for others.
Okay, yeah, I do understand that, you know, sometimes statistics are hard to come by and you need to do research, and that takes a lot of funding and effort and time. So, but I think you also answered another question, you know, by giving examples of some of the initiatives for returning migrants as to how they are helped to reintegrate into society. So, Pichit, there is a question from Adib. You talked about the concept of inclusive terminology. How does this apply to visual media?
Thank you. So for visual media, are you talking about the graphics or?
Adib, could you please explain?
Well, usually I would respond to chat. Yeah, visual media in the sense of the use of images, photographs, and also audio-visual media as well.
Thank you for the clarification. Of course, the basic principle is to do no harm. So it is encouraged that when we present migrant workers, especially women, we do not want to re-victimize migrant workers. We don't want to project them or to show them as the victim of discrimination or violence. We would like them to be shown as, you know, because we want the labor migration to be a tool of empowerment. So many times we have seen images or even illustration of migrant workers as someone whose life is so miserable. And is that the message that we want to send across to our audience? I don't think so, because we don't want to paint them, you know, as a group of people, or, you know, a group of population whose life is so miserable, right? Because labor migration is a tool for them to learn new skills, to advance in their financial independence, and also to support their family. So that would be my answer. I hope that answer your question.
Adib, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. I do totally get you, Pichit, because sometimes it's also good for us to kind of talk about the kind of contributions that they have done, migrant workers, and their contributions as a way of doing it into a film or making it into a photography exhibition or something like that, because, you know, you're telling them the other side of the story as well. And that also can go a long way in wiping out some of the hostilities that seem to be quite prevalent within ASEAN itself. So here's another question. So it's either for Pichit or any other panelists. If we agree that migrant workers play a big part of ASEAN, then how to realize the policies and gender issues around it to allow them to work in ASEAN safely and legally? Well, we already have, I think, the 2013 ASEAN Declaration on the Promotion and Protection of the Rights of Migrant Workers, but it has not been implemented. So I think it's not whether we need more policies. I just think that we do have existing initiatives and declarations and policies, but whether or not these are implemented on the ground, that is the question. The political will for governments in ASEAN to implement what they have in paper, you know, that is the question. So that is why it continues to take lots and lots of lobbying efforts from CSOs and NGOs and human rights activists, and also some parliamentarians, ASEAN parliamentarians for human rights, for example, to keep pushing for more progressive policy or existing policies to actually be workable on the ground. But Didik, Pichit, you know, Maria, what do you have to say about this?
I think there are enough policies for women, for the protection of women, for the upholding of women's rights, whether they are migrant or not. For as long as sexism, for as long as male chauvinism exists, there will be the exploitation of women, especially in elementary jobs, whether they are from a foreign country or they're locals. So there is really that root of sexism and male chauvinism, culture, and so on, that denigrates the position of women. Profit becomes the main interest of private sector that promotes the export of labor, which is the worst kind of label for labor migration.
Maria, taking up from what you said, since women seem to be at the, you know, bearing the brunt of, you know, migration and also some of the discriminatory policies by ASEAN, and now given the COVID situation, do you think that civil society organizations should work closely with media to encourage them to look at reporting from a gender lens as well?
In fact, it should. In fact, it should. And lobby the government, really, because many of our, you know, sexism and male chauvinism is actually a power play. It's a kind of, you know, show of power over someone. And here, the gender plays a role where men think they are, they have power over the weaker sex, the women. And so that has to be, brought out, and media will have a big role to play in taking out the myths of power. In this period, particularly, domestic workers, for example, who earn more than their husbands left behind, then that violence within domestic violence becomes a possible issue also. So there are those many things that come with this male chauvinist and sexist culture.
Right. So I'm really glad that we have our media friends here with whom we can continue to engage with to push this, this narrative through. Pichit, there is another question for you. Could you give examples about contributions by migrant workers to the economy?
Yes, thank you for the question. The United Nations estimated that around 63.9 billion US dollars were received in remittances in Southeast Asia in 2016. It is estimated that also that women's remittances can make up half of this.
Okay, thank you. So we have got, I think, a few more minutes left. One last question that's also from Adib.
Mahi, if I may, I would like to also compliment Maria's remark to the previous question. That I mean, from communications perspective, I think to conduct or to design a campaign, to raise awareness by providing accurate and positive information about migrant workers and their contributions to the countries of destination is also very important if we want to drive or to make the policies a reality. We can promote the campaign that address the root cause of negative attitudes toward migrant workers, or tackle stigma and raise the status of the roles they play in many different sectors. So, and as media professionals, I think we can also take care to ensure that messaging does not promote migrant workers, especially women migrant workers, as victims, but inherently vulnerable. We want to communicate with the audience that, again, I would like to repeat that labor migration is a tool of empowerment, not only for men, but for women as well. So over, thank you.
One question, because I have been also trying to work very hard, campaigning and putting the right messages out there, not just where migrant workers are concerned, but also refugees. And one stumbling block is the fact that there is no political will by the government. The government does not partner us because, it can do a way bigger campaign than we can. And those messages coming from the government, it will send a strong message. So how effective can these campaigns be without the participation from the government, without the green light or,
So let me give an example of one campaign that we are doing in the Safe and Fair program between ILO and UN Women. We are working a lot with CSOs and our local partners and stakeholders who are not government to run the campaign. In Malaysia, we are working with Project Liberate to raise the awareness of violence against migrant workers, including women, and also to promote the better understanding of their situations and their contributions to the society in Malaysia. So seeing the youth as the entry point, because we know that especially the university students, in one day, they will become employers who employ migrant workers, or one day they will become a policy maker, or even maybe now their parents or in their house, they have domestic workers working and supporting them. So if not with or supported by the government, I think working with the CSO and local partners is also another way.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I know this is an interesting question and you can talk for another hour or so, but you know, Adib has been.
Can I just say a little bit to the media?
So we have to wrap up. Thank you very much, Pichit, Didik, and Maria for the
Mahi,
insightful.
Mahi.
Yes.
Yes. May I have just a few words before you are closing?
I think you have like 1 minute.
Okay. Yes. Mahi, it is interesting. The last question you raised to Pichit about the how if our effort not supported by the government. We experienced actually recently the role of the social media. The role of social media, of course, it is also backed by the journalists, because through the social media, the empowerment of the foreign worker itself will become much more better. And then the NGO role, CSO role become also the most important thing. And one example that I would like to share in this forum, whenever a certain problems can be put under the carpet because of many interests, whether it is in the government officer or government institution, whenever it is revealed by the social media and the journalists with a specific report, even the report can be read by the presidents through Facebook, through WhatsApp, through TikTok. Even the TikTok become a specific power to let everybody knows about the problem and of course find out the best solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Didik. Thank you so much for that. But just like what you said, social media is also a double-edged sword, and sometimes you have trolls, really pushing us, off the cliff. But thank you very much, Didik and Pichit and Maria, and also to Ajinda, Adib, and Danny for this incredible opportunity for us to be able to present our views. Thank you. And now it's Danny, your platform. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. I hope everybody has got a good chance to understand the situation a little bit better. We only got 2 more things to do, small ones. I hope you guys can assist. We have a small little poll. As usual, when it comes to funders, they want to see that, hey, you guys have attended and you guys have appreciated it, and etc. So please fill in the poll for us. In the poll also, I asked that the journalist, if you agree that we start a WhatsApp group for the journalists here, yeah, so that you guys can reach out to each other and in now or in the future, so that you can collaborate and network further. Yeah, so you leave your contact details in there in the poll. Number 2, we need to take a picture with everybody's cameras on, right? So please take 3 minutes to fill up the poll. I think it should be in the chat. Yes, there it is. Yeah, maybe as you fill up the poll, you switch on your camera so we don't have to take more of your time, I mean. Rosa, Rachel.
I have a question.
Yes, Matili.
Yeah, I'm just a student, so is it okay?
I think they said that you are disabled my camera. I don't know what happened.
Sorry, I put your picture on in the.
It's okay. I will. Okay. I hope with my video. Okay. Hey, what happened?
Are you decent, Rosa?
I think so. I don't know what I do with my camera here.
Rosa is the editor-in-chief in Timor Post. Very nice lady.
Oh, I think this one is. This is like, I don't know what to do.
Got to turn it around and face it. Yeah, all right.
Yeah, that's why I have to turn around, but I don't know what happened. Sorry, because we have a problem in my country. No power, just power on and very noisy. Okay.
All right.
Oh my God. I don't. Oh, yeah, already. Okay, I got it. Yes. So. Okay.
There. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So, yeah, Ajinda, go for it.
Yes.
So I guess, yeah, please complete the poll. I'd like to thank Mahi again, Maria, Pichit, and Didik for a great session, right? So journalists, if you have more questions for them, I wonder if they're okay to take your questions, Mahi, Pichit? Yeah. If yes, I'll get them to send the questions to me, and I will direct them to you.
Yes, that's
Okay.
fine.
Yeah. So if any of you want to write a story about today, about the subject matter of today, and going forward, if your story project has got that, and you need them to be your source, just send me the questions, and I'll pass it along to them.
Okay, just so we can call today station in our news.
Sorry.
We can call today session for our news because I'm very interested about the panelists from Indonesia. Then this is what is have done in our country. So I want to quote that on the straight news. I mean from the news for Monday.
Is that okay, Didik? She wants to quote you.
No problem.
About the visa, she said that if member of ASEAN will be free visa, not the tourism visa. This is like some disadvantage from that. So I want to I'd like to quote about that. If okay?
Yes, no problem. As long as you can explain the disadvantages and also the advantages, as I mentioned before.
Okay. Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. So I like that already. Okay, so if everybody's completed the poll, Ajinda, you took a picture already? Narim just put on his camera.
Yes, I have. I got
Brilliant.
Narim on screen as well.
Next round, remember next Saturday, same time, okay? There's another thing going on. Of course, we will send you a reminder before that. So if there's nothing else, thank you everybody for turning up and staying throughout. I promise next week we'll have a break. Yeah. Short break in the middle. And okay, so thank you everybody. Have a good weekend. See you again next Saturday.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you,
Bye.
colleagues. Bye-bye. Have a nice
Bye.
weekend.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.